SJ. Welcome to Mvskoke Radio, your weekly source for tribal and community news, interesting guests and discussions, plus a local events calendar. SJ, Stongo, Gary Fife, Jaho, Jeff Gados, Mvskoke Radio, Mabo Hedgewedskis. Welcome to our program from the studios of 1240 The Brew, KOKL downtown Muscogee here. Beautiful autumn day here, so we hope you're out enjoying it. Thank you so much for listening to our show today. We've got a couple things we'll be sharing with you. We've just gotten through September, which was National Childhood Obesity Month, and we'll be talking to Michelle Dennison of the Oklahoma City Indian Clinic about the challenges we are facing, and some tips about some healthy eating habits that would be wonderful and help us with that challenge. Also, in the second segment of our show, we'll be speaking with the Muscogee writer, McArthur Fellow, and William Mitchell College of Law professor Sarah Deere. She's released a new book, written a new book called The Beginning and End of Rape, a subject that we unfortunately are still having to deal with. The Domestic Violence Month is with us, so this is a wonderful subject, and it's always a pleasure to talk with Sarah Deere. So let's see if we're ready to go. I guess we'll just jump right into it. We're speaking with Michelle Dennison, the dietitian, I believe, with Oklahoma City Indian Clinic. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
Oh, head in my hay in Muscogee. Just all is well. We're just enjoying the day, and I'm glad that you've taken some time to chat with me this morning here. Now, as I understand it, we just went through September, which was National Childhood Obesity Month. Is that correct?
Yes, that is.
And for what our challenges these days in health and other things, this ranks pretty high as far as the things that affect us as a people, and in particular our children. So first of all, tell me a little bit about the problem of childhood obesity as you see it there.
Well, here at the Oklahoma City Indian Clinic, we see my primary duty in my position is to provide opportunities for people to prevent lifelong diseases like diabetes. The problem with type 2 diabetes is that it is often related to obesity. And further, we're seeing type 2 diabetes coming out in our children, and it is mostly due to obesity. We have about a 66% overweight obesity incidence in our facility.
Now, let me take a second and backtrack. Tell me something about your facility there in Oklahoma City. I would presume that serving Native American people from all over the state, a lot of different tribes and cultures are coming in there. Mm-hmm. So tell me about your facility there first.
So the Oklahoma City Indian Clinic is a patient-centered medical home here in Oklahoma City. We serve approximately 18,000 patients per year. We are open to anyone with a certificate degree of Indian blood, so a CDIB card. And we have people from tribes from all over the United States that we serve here in Oklahoma City. We have a dental office on site, pharmacy, physical therapy, of course our doctors. We have pediatricians as well as a pediatric endocrinologist, which is pretty important when you're dealing with childhood obesity.
And for our listeners not familiar with the relationship between Native Americans and the government, the services you provided come from, I presume, grants and things that are embedded in treaty rights and the executive orders that establish the relationship between Indian people and the government. So, in a sense, it's really not free health care, but it's been paid for by our land and our blood and history and this kind of thing.
Well, we are a little bit different than the Indian Health Service and the Indian Health Service units like you would see in Wewoka or Claremore. We are a 501c3 nonprofit that is dedicated to serving quality health care to American Indians. We do receive a small amount of funding from the federal government, but the rest of it is based on outside grants that we write and receive, as well as our billing, that we're able to bill for patients who have Medicare, Medicaid, or third-party insurance.
Well, we want to congratulate you on the job you're doing and your presence there. I know that so many of our Native people depend on clinics like this to make those connections for their health. All right, well, let's get back to the subject in hand here. Childhood obesity, of course, we all recognize as a major problem among our young people. We see so many of them who have perhaps not had some of the more healthier eating habits, and that are having to deal with the problems that come along with this challenge. I guess maybe for our purpose here, maybe you could define obesity, perhaps.
So obesity is a number that once a child reaches a certain weight, if they go over that, then they're considered overweight. If they are even further over that number, it's considered obese. And so when we're dealing with children and trying to help them manage their weight, we kind of lump the two classes together, the overweight and obese together. It's because both of them are really in need of intervention to help prevent lifelong disease. Now, that number is set by the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control. If a child is over the 85th BMI percentile, that is overweight. If they're over the 95th BMI percentile, that is obese.
BMI percentile. Let's
BMI percentile. BMI is your body mass index.
Okay.
It is an outcome of an equation that takes into effect your gender, your age, your height, your weight, and then once that comes out on the other side, it gives you the percentile on how you rank against everyone else. So it's like we create these growth charts based on where everybody sits at that point in time. And so if you have excess weight and you're bigger than most people in your age group, it kind of, it breaks down into percentiles. And if you're over the 85th percentile, you are considered overweight.
Okay, well, just kind of personally judging myself by that standard against many others, I'm not doing too bad, but my measurements are usually pretty well controlled by the size of my pants.
Right? You don't want to buy new clothes.
No, I mean, forget it. And fashion means nothing to me, but comfort certainly does. I'm at the point where I use a lot of suspenders instead of...
to help keep the pants up, huh?
Yeah. And that way, I'm not out to impress the ladies anymore, but comfort is it.
Comfort is king.
Yeah, now, I laugh and joke about this kind of thing, but as we look around, we see too many of our young little ones that are obviously the product of eating habits that are just devastating to them, and then, of course, that sticks with them into their older lives. Do you have any numbers, any estimates, any feel or guesstimate, if you will, on the number of our people that are affected by this particular problem?
Well, as I stated just a little bit earlier, in our clinic for our children, the children that we see, about 66% of those children are considered overweight or obese.
60%?
Now, 66%.
Oh.
Now, yeah, it's really high, but what we're seeing nationally is that we for so long nationally we just saw this huge rise every year in obesity and overweight, and it just kept going up, and we thought it would never stop. But what we have seen now nationally is that those numbers are starting to level off, and that really is the first step in seeing a decrease. You have to first level off before you can start going down. So our hope is that nationally, now that we've leveled off on overweight and obese, and people are starting to take steps to prevent overweight and obese, that we will now start seeing a decrease in those numbers.
What would you point to as the causes for this problem?
It's always going to be multiple causes, but if you really had to boil it down to brass tacks, you are truly looking at how many calories these children are consuming versus how many calories they are burning. And so you've probably heard in the past, you have to eat less and move more, and that's really that basic math equation. Excess weight really, truly comes from eating more calories than you burn. And so to reduce that, you have to burn more calories than you eat.
So I guess, for example, then, if some 10 or 11-year-old knocks down a supersized pack of French fries and then goes and sits in front of a video game for a couple of hours, then you got problems coming.
That's the real problem, because they are eating far more than their body needs, and their body has no choice but to store that because it can't use that energy. And you touched upon a real good point that we try to make in all our programs: screen time. Video games are fun and they're engaging, but they do very little for our bodies. They are not. Our bodies are not designed to stay still, and that's really what's happening a lot of times with video games, and we're not burning the calories that our bodies need to burn to stay healthy.
At one point, we were, I think, considered the healthiest people on the planet, practically. Back when earlier colonial times were coming, we were hunters and farmers and people who were out working all the time and engaged in all this physical activity. We see a resurgence in interest in things like stickball and some of the more traditional tribal games around the nation. But is that enough? I mean, do we have to go more? And I guess we'll get around to it, but how will we attack the problem? But, how much activity should we be seeing, I guess?
Currently, the recommendation is that for children that they have 60 minutes of active play per day. Now, a lot of times parents really rely on the school system to make that happen, whether it's in PE classes or recess. But if you really take a look at what the children are doing in school, a lot of times they're sitting. And so that we cannot completely depend on the school system to provide our children with the 60 minutes of physical activity per day. So once they get home from school, that's something that as parents, as responsible parents who want our children to be healthy, we need to encourage and support our children to have that 60 minutes of active play or physical activity, whatever the kid enjoys every day.
Now, I think you put your finger on a problem there, the parental guidance. Are the parents then just allowing these kids to develop these bad habits and not doing anything about it? And what advice would you give a parent? I know you mentioned part of it, but if you're really going to pinpoint there. Well,
and I think, kids are smart. I mean, they're a lot smarter a lot of times than what we understand, and they are following our actions. And so I think for parents, if you want your child to be active and you want your child to be healthy, you have to role model that behavior. Kids learn so much from their parents that are nonverbal cues. So if they see their parent sitting on the couch, eating chips or drinking soda pop, that's what they're trying to mimic. But if they see a parent outside playing basketball with them or riding bikes or even jumping rope, that's the behavior that they're going to mimic. So I just encourage all of our parents to be the role model, be that person that is guiding your child how to be healthy.
Let's now turn to food and consumption here for a minute now. What are the biggest villains that you would say that children are encountering in food that's creating a problem there?
Well, I think the number one villain, like you say, and it is a villain, is our sugar-sweetened beverages. So a lot of times, and we call those, people will drink like soda or Gatorade or sweet tea, and they don't realize how many calories they're getting out of that beverage. And furthermore, beverages don't tend to make us full, so they don't feel full, and their brain is still telling them they're hungry, although they may have just drank enough calories to last them all day. So we encourage our patients to have 0 sugar-sweetened beverages per day, and so that means no soda, no juices or punches like Kool-Aid, no energy drinks, no sports drinks, no sugar-sweetened tea, and no 100% fruit juice. We have found that our kids consume almost 150 calories per day of 100% fruit juice. And that, that's just something that, everybody thinks fruit juice is healthy. But when you just really look at it, you're missing a lot of the nutrients that you get of fresh fruit, and you're just adding sugar to the diet. So that's our big thing, is that we are encouraging our parents to give no sugar-sweetened beverages per day.
But something like a fresh squeezed orange juice would be okay?
Well, that's the thing. When you squeeze fruit yourself, you're still not getting that fiber that comes from eating fresh fruit. And so it hits the system out very quickly. It doesn't take long to digest. It's not cueing the brain to tell you that you're full. So I always tell my kids, if you're going to be having fruit, you need to be chewing it.
Now, you mentioned a number of drinks that I know are monstrously popular with Oklahomans, and I guess in particular. And telling someone not to drink sweet tea is almost saying, don't go to church or something like that.
Right.
So,
it's tough.
Yeah, so these are the kinds of things we really have to look out for and actively campaign against, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is a societal change. I mean, people are used to having their sweet tea or they're used to having their soda, but we are consuming something like, if you counted all those together, something like 380 calories per day just from our drink. And for some kids, that's their whole meal. And so it's just a lot of calories that are not telling us that we're full, and we're not expending that energy. So, of course, we're gaining weight.
Yeah, and if you drink a lot of sweet soda, you're also rotting your teeth out, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the dentists go all about the soda because it does. I mean, all those things are rotting your teeth anyway. This was not what we were made to drink. We know water. That's our best available drink. We were made to drink water, and that has no calories. It's not going to rot your teeth. Your body was made for that.
Well, I think we've seen a trend over the last decade where more people are following that advice, and you see a bottle of water sitting next to someone, or they're actively rehydrating themselves with something like that, with plain old water, no calories, no nothing there. So, would you agree with that? I mean, have you seen that? Would you say that's true?
I think we see it's more on people's conscience, but I also see a lot of times with kids that, like, if they're going to come to our after-school tennis program, they show up with a bottle of Gatorade, and my message is always that even most of the sports figures, like the professional sports figures, they don't consume those sports drinks. When you see the coach at the end of the game get the Gatorade shower, what's really coming out of those ice chests is water. And so I think we have to still deal with the marketing. They all want to be like Kevin Durant, and even the pro athletes know that those things are not as good for them.
Well, while we're talking about those particular drinks, let me ask you this. I was working with a firefighting crew a few years back in California, and they have big tubs of bottled water and Gatorade and this kind of thing. And some of the health folks are saying, if you're going to drink that Gatorade, only do one a day. I mean, beyond that, it's not good for you. So what's the reasoning there?
Well, what you see is, number one, it just has too many calories, and that's what they're really getting at. It's just not good for you. Now, yes, those sports drinks, they do have electrolytes, and so you'll have potassium and you'll have sodium, and that's important for people that are really dehydrated. Most people, 99% of people, are not really dehydrated like that, and so they are served just as well and probably better by having water. If you have more than one Gatorade, or if you have one Gatorade, if you're really dehydrated, that rehydrates you, and then you can switch back to water. So you don't need these multiple sports drinks per day, because all you're adding is just extra pounds.
And if you're buying them, there's a lot of money going down the tube.
A lot of money. They make big money. I mean, they're very clever in their marketing. They know what to do.
Yeah. You mentioned these athletes are getting paid a big pile of cash to sell this stuff, and they don't necessarily use it, huh?
Exactly.
All right, let's look at the brighter side of this subject. Now, you have a number of ideas on healthy eating and activities and things that would go a long way in fighting this problem. So let's talk about that for a second.
Okay.
We obviously have talked about the bad stuff or some of the bad stuff, but on the flip side, what are the alternatives?
And I'm so glad you asked that. We have a concept right now. It's called the 5210 concept. It's been pushed pretty nationally, and it has been so effective. And so what it is for every number, it represents a recommendation for your intake or your physical activity. So the first number is 5, and that recommends that you eat 5 servings of vegetables and fruits per day. And that's one thing that we see in our kids is that we're just not getting fruits and vegetables. I mean, they'll have a hamburger or they'll have French fries, which is not really considered a vegetable because you've already taken all the good stuff off of it and dumped it in fat. But really getting those other vitamins and minerals from the fruits and vegetables is making a huge difference, and it's less calories. And so it's easier for you to maintain or lose weight when you eat fruits and vegetables than when you don't.
Before you go on, I used to have a friend who swore up and down that he, when he ate a hamburger, he always had a slice of tomato and lettuce, and that was his salad for the day. I mean, was he just deluding himself, or?
Absolutely. I mean, come on. I love it that when people do that, they try to be creative and really try to justify their actions.
Oh, yeah. French fries are a vegetable, yeah.
No, not so much. But, for example, a serving size of fruit and vegetables is about the size of a tennis ball. And so unless he was having a tennis ball size of lettuce and tomato on his hamburger, he wasn't hitting it at all.
Well, I know some places kind of stuff it on there just to kind of show you how little meat you're actually getting. So.
Right.
Okay. Now, what about things that are high carb? Obviously, are very tasty and this kind of stuff. But what would you suggest in switching out those kind of things and then substituting something else?
It just really depends. Sometimes your high-carb foods are sweet, and, of course, our substitution would be you could get a fruit, which is sweet, as long as you're chewing it. You're not having the bad side effects that you see sometimes without it. But sometimes, people crave that salty, like chips or something. And so choosing lower fat items of that is always a good choice. So instead of maybe potato chips that are fried in fat and they're high in fat, you might choose pretzels, which are low fat, but they also have a little bit of salt on them too.
Right. Now, as we're looking at this particular area, snacking, how much is too much if someone were to sit down and enjoy a snack of whatever? What kind of limits would you suggest?
So it's different for everybody because every single person is unique in what their calorie needs are. Everybody's metabolism is just a little bit differently. So my rule of thumb is if you are eating to overcome boredom or eating to overcome sadness, but you're not hungry, if you're not responding to hunger, then you don't need that snack. And if you're eating because you're hungry, and that's, that really takes some reflection to really figure out, am I hungry or am I bored or am I sad? Then, something small like a one piece of fruit would be adequate. And then if you're gaining weight, then you're eating too much. I mean, that's our overall gauge.
Okay, and so keeping a well-calibrated scale around it's a good idea. Huh?
It's very helpful, and we don't recommend that you weigh more than once a week because weights do fluctuate on a daily basis. But if you're eating a snack every day and you gain a half a pound or a pound in a week, then it's too much. Your body does not need that.
Okay. Now, what can parents do to make this more appealing to the kids? If they're knocking out a chocolate bar or something like that, like what are you going to say? I mean, that's a pretty powerful opponent you've got there. What can we do to change their mind, or at least get them off of it?
Right.
First of all, don't take them through the checkout line at the grocery store. Right?
Yes, and be the parent. For most kids, the parents are buying the food. So if the parent goes and buys a chocolate bar, then that's not being a good role model, and it's in the house, and it's easier to get to. So that would be the first thing. Secondly, you have to look at, as you raise your children, if you raise them with good habits, that they like fruit, or you're offering fruit a lot of times, or if you're offering vegetables a lot of times, those habits are going to cement, and they won't need those other things like chocolate bars.
Oh, boy, there's a tough one. All right, as we wrap it up here, is there a way that you could package this advice and share it with our listeners? What kind of bullet points would you want to put out there?
So I guess for the listeners, this is what I'd like for them to say. Be what you want your child to be. If you want your child to be healthy and active and have a long, fruitful, quality life, then they need to be that too. It's very hard for children to overcome the constant suggestion that they don't have to be healthy if their parents are unhealthy.
Okay. Michelle, now, if someone had questions and was in your area and wanted to chat with you, how do they get in touch with you?
Well, they can do that a couple of ways. They can come visit our clinic. We are at 4913 West Reno in Oklahoma City. And then you can also just give us a call at 405-948-4900.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for taking time out of your morning here. We appreciate the information that you've shared, and it was fun, and I'm going to feel good about passing up the French fries.
That's right. Thank you so much for having me.
All right,
it was fun.
You have a good one. All right.
I will. You too. Bye-bye.
Okay, now we'll take a short break, and we'll be back with Sarah Deere to talk about her new book and a little bit about her being a genius, according to the McArthur Foundation. So please stay with us here on Muscogee Radio.
Nearly 22 million women and girls and nearly 1.6 million men and boys have been raped in their lifetime, probably by someone they know. April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month. If you or someone you know has been sexually assaulted, confidential support is only a phone call away. Contact the Muscogee Creek Nation Family Violence Prevention Program at 918-732-7869 and ask to speak to an advocate. Services are free and open to the general public.
I started doing it when I was 11. I wanted to be just like my big brother. And some of my friends were already doing it. We got hooked fast. I just can't get enough. I'm Jacob, and I'm addicted to playing the drums.
There's lots of stuff that makes it cool to be Native. Doing meth isn't one of them. Find something better to do. Check out ncai.org. A message from the Partnership for a Drug-Free America and the National Congress of American Indians.
Welcome back to Muscogee Radio. Sarah Deere, SJ Stongo.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm doing well this morning. Thank you. How are you?
Okay, great. Well, we're enjoying this gorgeous Oklahoma weather down here. How are things up there in Minnesota?
Well, it gets a little crisp in the air around this time of year. We've even had snow this early, of course.
Yay.
But we're in sunny high 50s, so it's kind of my weather, kind of my type of weather. I like it.
Yeah, a little frost. It makes it nicest to sleep in the morning, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Well, first of all, let us offer our congratulations on your being named a McArthur Fellow. That's an incredible honor. I think the term they use laughingly in many places is genius. How is it going as a genius and being recognized for your work?
Well, I don't know that I'm ever going to get used to that word. It's not something that I would label myself. It seems a little, arrogant in some ways. But it's been a year since I found out that I was a McArthur Fellow. And this year has been really whirlwind, lots of speaking engagements, lots of requests for, me to come to events, to talk about my work. So I've been on the road quite a lot. And it can be very tiring, but it's also exciting, and I'm really glad to be able to have the opportunity to do more for Native women.
Well, we were down here are very proud when we heard that you were chosen, and for the incredible dedication to the work you do on such an incredibly serious subject. So we just wanted to make sure that you knew that we were so happy for you. Now, you've got a history now of working on the problem of violence against Native women, and have championed the cause, if we want to coin a phrase here. Tell me, first of all, what did it take for you to take on this challenge and a burden, if you will, or make this effort?
Well, I think the the issue found me. I was first really inspired by women that I met when I was a student at the University of Kansas, and I was working at the Rape Crisis Center there. I had the chance to work with a number of women at Haskell, women who had been, maybe raped on campus, but also women who had been raped maybe in their homelands, but never had a chance to sort of get help for that. And those women were instrumental in sort of opening my eyes to the stark reality that Native women and men and children are facing in our communities with such high rates of abuse. And so those women inspired me to do that work, and that providing direct services is something that is invaluable. I mean, you can't put a price tag on it. I was a volunteer, but I gained more from that particular experience than even, if I can go so far to say, law school.
Now, you mentioned Haskell, which is well known to most of Native America. Did that environment do anything to exacerbate the problem? And the reason why I'm asking is, it's pretty much an Indian school,
right?
And I've had encounters with a lot of guys which I have to say I call my friends, who were pretty cavalier about the idea of having sex with a girl, and whether she wanted to or not, and that kind of thing. So I'm wondering if that tribalness, perhaps, or whatever you want to call it, how did that affect the situation there and the problem?
Well, I'll say first of all that it's been over 20 years since I worked in Lawrence, so it's quite possible that things have changed and improved.
Yeah, I would agree.
But Haskell is really no different than any college campus in terms of, the mentality sometimes of young men is that they're entitled to have sex. And that would happen at the University of Kansas as well. I think the difference for Haskell is that historical trauma that sort of carries into the lives of young people today is something you can't quite put your finger on. But that history of trauma amplifies the problem, really. It creates a system in which people, they know that their mother was assaulted and nothing happened, and that their grandmother was assaulted and nothing happened, and so on and so forth. And so the trust of the system, especially in Haskell, where you'd have to report to an outside police department, there's a real hesitancy to embrace that as a possible solution because it simply hasn't worked elsewhere. And I do think that, and again, it's been a couple decades, but I think that the other issue there is, it was a boarding school. And so that grounds, the campus itself, while I know there's been ceremonies to sort of address this, the grounds of that campus, was the center point for many people's abuse and humiliation, and that kind of permeates campus life, at least as I remember. But at the same time, it's an amazing school and amazing people and amazing students doing amazing things. But there is that sort of undercurrent of trauma that's present, I think, anytime you have a campus of Native people.
Does our tribal society have anything to do with it? I know that when you're around other Native people, you tend to be, that's your club, your group, your society, and it's a whole lot different from the outside world. And many times, I guess it would have the effect of putting these kind of things behind closed doors, or we don't talk about that, or something, from a parent perhaps, or a grandparent or something like that. Where do you think that fits in, or does it?
Well, it's again, I think in any culture, in any, race or ethnicity, there's a deep feeling of shame around anything sexual, whether it's positive sexual or sexual assault. And there is a tendency to sort of sweep it under the rug. And one of the things, one of the things that I've noticed in tribal communities is that, it doesn't matter if you report the crime. The system doesn't respond. The system fails you. And so what a lot of Native women have learned, and I've talked to hundreds of Native women who have been assaulted, is that, the silence is actually sometimes the best way to cope, because if you do open up and you take that risk and you report somebody, maybe somebody important in your community, somebody with power, nothing good comes of it. So really what we need to do for survivors is change that system and make sure that we go back to our traditional values, which is to protect women and children. That's the primary goal of a tribal nation. So if we can start to turn that sort of culture around and say, we are going to do something going forward. If an assault is reported, we are going to take it seriously, and we're going to make sure the victim has the support that she or he needs.
I guess taking this one step further, I'm aware of instances where this kind of assault has occurred, and it was from a family member, and a woman or a victim. Let's say young men are also caught up in this, but saying, well, that was an uncle or that was a grandfather, so I can't say anything. This is our blood relative. I mean, is that still prevalent? Is it still something? And you have any idea on how to overcome something like that?
I think it's really difficult. We have so many assaults committed by family members, and particularly maybe powerful people in the community, or people who may be ceremonial leaders or speak the language fluently. People who are held up with high esteem, and the victims feel that no one will believe them if they come forward, and they may be receiving backlash from the community. And so what's really important is the kind of work that Sean Partridge and the women at the Muscogee Nation Violence Prevention Program are doing, is to make sure there's confidential support for those women and girls, so that if this does happen to them, they know they have a place to go to talk to. And there's not going to be any pressure there to report, because advocates understand the risks that are taken there. To make that decision to come forward is, a life-altering decision, and it's a high burden to put on somebody who's already been traumatized. Mm-hmm. So having that anonymous support is really the first step in terms of helping women who decide to come forward do it in a way that's safe for them, and in a way that they at least have a few people around them who believe their story.
Now, if someone were to step forward and initiate these proceedings, there's strong possibilities of criminal proceedings there. And it would seem to me that, in my experience, I've seen that being an inhibiting factor. Saying, well, no, I don't want to go to court, and I don't have to relive this, or I don't want to show my face, or talk about it in public. What are your thoughts there?
Well, I think it's up to the victim. I think, after someone has been assaulted, especially by someone that they trusted, the last thing that we want to do is say, you have to report, you have to get on the stand, you have to get him arrested. That is such a high burden to bear, and such a major, and it's a secondary trauma. It's additional trauma. So, while I hope that more victims will come forward in the future, I think right now we have to really be respectful of the decision not to come forward, because we don't have a good reason to trust the system as a whole. And I think the women who are making that kind of decision deserve all the support and love that they can gather, whether they report or not. And I think when we start doing that for every woman that comes forward, I think we will gradually see a change in the willingness of victims to actually make a police report and participate in prosecution. Because ultimately, the perpetrators should be held accountable. Right now, when women don't report, it's sort of like that accountability burden rests on their shoulders instead of the perpetrator's shoulders. And it's going to take a long time, because It's been quiet for decades, and maybe if you think about it, really centuries. So it's going to take more than a few years to really turn this around. But the work that the advocates are doing is what's really going to make the difference.
Now, you brought up a point there I believe you covered in your book, and let's turn to that publication for a bit here. Now, the title of your new book is The Beginning and End of Rape. That's, Confronting Sexual Violence in Native America is a complete title there. And my God, that's kind of an intimidating title.
I know. It was a second choice.
A second choice.
It is a very... it's an intense topic. It's an intense title, pretty bold, and it might actually scare some people off from reading it.
Where did it come from?
Well, I was really thinking about what my book was ultimately about. And at the end of the book, I have a very positive sort of outlook for what can happen in the future. So the beginning of rape, in terms of Native women, I identify as being coming from Europe. That is really when the concept and the crime of rape was really introduced to our people. And so that's the beginning of rape. And then the end of rape is something that I think we can accomplish in a generation. There are certain things that need to be in place at the tribal level, the federal level, the state level, advocacy, all of those things. If they're working together and they're working in the right way, I really believe that we could see an end to rape. And that's why the book is titled The Beginning and End of Rape. The story of how we can accomplish this.
Now, obviously, the beginning then would be at the start of colonialism. And the thing that particular part intrigues me is that I've heard this come up before among some of the Plains tribes who are still feeling the effects of things like Wounded Knee and the loss of their people and land, and then even in Alaska, where some of the folks talked about the Russian invasion, if you will, and colonial mentality there. Is that still affecting our people? I mean, I guess a way to explain it might be the Big Bang Theory, I guess. Are we still feeling the reverb from it?
Yes, absolutely. So one of the things that I've learned about, for instance, for Muscogee people, is that a lot of the sexual assault, the mass rape that happened to Native women, the Muscogee women, happened during the Trail of Tears. And so, that's not an aspect of the Trail of Tears or the trails of many tears you really read about even in the history books that tell the story in detail. It was sort of the unwritten, again, unspoken sort of mass crime that happened to Native women. And, when the Trail of Tears was going on, there was really no recourse. I mean, what would a woman do if she was raped by a member of the military in the middle of the night when they were camping? What is it that she could do to find justice for that? And so that silence and that fear, was really embedded then in the experiences of Muscogee women. And then when we got to Indian Territory, there was definitely no intervention. Nobody was ever held accountable for any of those assaults that happened on the trails. And when you think about it that way, those women then had children and daughters and so on and so forth. And that fear and embarrassment and shame was sort of passed from one generation to the next. So even though it was over, almost 200 years ago now, there's still, I think, an undercurrent of that fear and that embarrassment and shame that came when outsiders, not Muscogee people, when outsiders came in and took advantage of our women and girls.
It'd be pretty hard to argue with a bayonet point, I would presume.
Right.
This book also looks at, I guess, the size of the problem. Is it the numbers involved? Are there any changes? I mean, what do you see as if you're going to put numbers into this discussion? What would you say that's been the impact on Native women? Well,
we have all kinds of statistics that tend to say almost always the same thing, which is that Native women in the United States experience the highest rate of rape in the nation, 2.5-fold. I mean, a significant disparity between Native women and other women. And one of the other challenges that we have with that data is that it's not tribal specific. It's sort of national scope. So there's these national surveys done that ask people, they're anonymous surveys done over the telephone. They ask who you are, what your race is, if you have been a victim of assault, who the perpetrator was, et cetera. So that's really where we have the data, because if you just count police reports, what we know is that most of these crimes are never reported. So in order to really try to get our heads wrapped around the scope of the problem, they have to do these surveys. And what these surveys are telling us year in and year out is that Native women have this highest rate of sexual violence. And the maximum sort of number that we've been able to gain from these statistics is 1 in 3 Native women will be raped in their lifetime. And that number, in my experience, I've traveled to about 100 Indian reservations in the last 20 years, is a gross understatement of the problem. I have heard, for instance, a woman say, an elder woman in the community who works on this issue, I don't know anybody in my community who has not been raped. And in other communities, I've heard things like where mothers say, I told my daughter what to do, not if she is raped, but when. So it's almost an inevitability in many communities. So the national data that we have, which is federal data, 1 in 3 Native women will be raped, is actually a gross underestimate of the extent of the problem. And it becomes very overwhelming when you start to think about that.
Has there been any impact since VAWA, Violence Against Women Act? I know it's just, I guess, in its infancy as far as history goes, and a limited number of tribes have actually been able to make some application within their communities.
Sure.
Has it changed anything?
I think it's just far too soon. Because when you think about how the problem has developed and the mistrust of the system, distrust of the system, that's taken hundreds of years to build up. And so, we passed a law in 2010. We were able to pass another law in 2013 that are both big steps in the right direction. But you can't expect women to begin trusting the system just because a new law is passed. So I think if we're going to see those numbers go down, I think it's going to be probably a decade out before we know for sure. And that can be frustrating to lawmakers because, of course, lawmakers, they pass a law, they want to see results. And so I've been trying to educate congressmen and senators that the numbers might stay pretty bad. That doesn't mean that the laws are failing. It just means that it's going to take a long time to reverse the trend of saying, I can't participate in the system is going to harm me and my family.
What about the tribal structure? How many tribes actually have a court system that's set up to deal with this, plus the cost? I mean, some tribes have judges that are not lawyers or have no legal background, and they're trying to decide these cases. So there's that practical application there that kind of stands in the way. I mean, is that going to be overcome, and what would it take?
Yeah, absolutely. So in order to actually exercise restored jurisdiction in these cases, which gives the tribes the right to sentence to higher terms, and it also gives the ability to prosecute certain non-Indians. But in order to take advantage of that jurisdiction, the tribes have to meet high benchmarks, basically act like a white court, have a law-trained judge, have public defenders, and these things are not bad, and I think most tribes would want to do these things if they could afford to do it. Make sure all the laws are published in a way that the public can have access to them. All of these things are needed in order to ensure that the tribal courts are going to be very fair to all involved, including the accused. And I think, again, that these are things that tribes have strived for, but simply don't have the financial support to be able to fully implement. So in addition to asking for restored jurisdiction from Congress, which is, I think, going to continue until we have a full restoration of tribal sovereignty, we also need the money to be able to implement these changes. I think right now, there's probably, if I were to estimate, maybe 30 to 40 tribes that can meet the benchmarks in these laws. And so in order to expand that scope, we're really going to need to see Congress allocate some funding to address, the safety needs in Indian country. And I think part of that is just understanding that the best way to respond to a crime is locally, right? And that, even, if you have a conservative senator, for example, a believer in small government, well, hey, tribes are small governments. So shouldn't that be where these kinds of solutions are developed? But tribes who can't afford to do these things are still left out.
Now, I was looking at one of the discussions you had with one of the Native publications, and a phrase popped up and kind of waved at me here. It said that rape is a direct and serious threat to tribal sovereignty. Now, how would you explain that?
Oh, thanks for asking that. This is an argument that I've been sort of developing over the years. When you think about all of the sort of difficult challenges that Native people have, and in talking about things like mental health and substance abuse and suicide and health problems, obesity, diabetes, heart disease, all of these things, all of those maladies, all of those challenges that we're having have a connection to sexual assault. Because when you experience a rape, you're at high risk for developing post-traumatic stress disorder. You're at high risk for suicide attempts, high risk for addiction, high risk for overeating, and all of these maladies. Scientifically now, Western science has finally figured this out, and I think that Native people have understood this for a really long time, is that when somebody experiences a trauma, it doesn't just affect your mind. It affects your body. It affects your health, your long-term health. Studies have shown that children who've experienced abuse have high rates of liver disease, right? And those are things that Native people have known. So when you think about all of the challenges that are experienced in tribal communities today, and that nearly all of them can be linked to having some kind of abuse or trauma in your background, if we want to turn our nations around and make our people healthy and encourage people to be healthy and strong, we have to address this issue of rape, because that's sort of what underlines all of it. We hear about suicide on reservations that come in kind of clusters or copycat suicides, and nobody really ever talks about the fact that those kids were probably raped, and that's why they've had to end their life, because they couldn't deal with the pain anymore. So if we can connect rape to all of these different issues, I think that we're going to strengthen tribal sovereignty, because you can't have a truly sovereign government if your people are so sad and so unhealthy. And that's my argument in the book.
All right, in the last minute or so we have for our discussion here, what's the bright spot? We have heard from people like Sean that there are more Native women stepping forward, making this case, dragging it out in the sunlight and things like that. What do you think?
I think that's true. I think the advocates that work for tribal governments and work for nonprofits are really the warriors in this movement. They're the ones that are making it safe for people to come forward without the pressure of necessarily reporting the crime, but getting help for the crime. I also think there's a tremendous role for Native men here, because Native men have traditionally not been rapists and murderers. That was not what Native men have done traditionally. And Native men are victims too. We have a higher rate of rape of Native men than we have of other racial groups of men. It's not as high as Native women, but we do have that problem. So we need to make sure that this is not just couched as a women's issue, but that men are coming forward too and saying, I'm going to hold my brothers accountable. I'm going to hold my uncles accountable. I'm not going to tolerate mistreatment of women in my life. And when that happens, and when that truly is partnered with the advocacy programs, I am very confident that our nations have the strength to really make a difference in this issue.
So for our Native men, if you're sitting there thinking, well, this is wrong, well, it probably is.
Yeah.
All right. Sarah, what about your book? When is it going to be available and where?
Well, it's called The Beginning and End of Rape. The current release date is November 1st. but it may be out sooner than that. It's one of those kind of unknowns right now. So it could be any time now, between now and November 1st. You can certainly pre-order it from Amazon.com. And the publisher is the University of Minnesota Press. So you can go directly to the University of Minnesota Press website and buy it directly from the publisher. If you know of a woman or a community member who needs this book but cannot afford it, I hope people will consider reaching out to me personally. Maybe, I don't know if I can give my email now,
Please.
But you can also Google me.
Okay. Well, go ahead and give your email if you like.
Okay. It's Sarah, SARAH, Deere, DEER, at wmitchell.edu. You can also Google Sarah Deere on Google, and it should bring you to my faculty page at the law school, which will have my email. So if you know somebody that really could benefit from this book and cannot afford it, please reach out to me, and I will do my very best to make sure that book gets into the hands of the people who need it.
Wonderful. Not only just talking the talk, but walking the walk there. Sarah Deere, so thank you so much for talking with us today and answering a lot of silly questions here from yours truly. But we want to congratulate you on the recognition that you've received for this incredible, important work and thing that means so much to our people. So, Mado,
thank you so much for having me.
All right, then let us know when you're down here.
Okay.
All right, thank you so much.
Bye.
Okay, Sarah Deere, a law professor with the William Mitchell School of Law in Minneapolis, and St. Paul, and talking about her new book, The Beginning and End of Rape, Confronting Sexual Violence in Native America. Okay, we got a few minutes left here. Let's knock off some community announcements here. First of all, it is National Depression Awareness Month. God, we're talking about wonderful subjects here on this show. Test your mood. You can check in with the Muscogee Creek Behavioral Health and Substance Abuse Service. They are offering some screenings. So if you're interested, the next one is on the 8th at the College of the Muscogee Nation here in Okmulgee, and also the Muscogee Creek Nation Medical Center in Okmulgee, so check it out. October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, hashtag Why I Stayed. Discussions of domestic violence, educational workshops through the month of October. The next one is the 13th from 9 to 11. That's at the Claude Cox Omniplex here in Okmulgee. And coming up again on the 27th at the same place. So if you're interested, please call 918-732-7979. On a much lighter subject, there will be Movies in the Dome coming up on October 22nd at 6:30. Free admission, concessions available, and the movie is Monsters, Inc. So check it out if you want to see a free flick. It's October 22nd at 6:30. Okay, Council Oaks ceremony coming up on Saturday, October 24th at 2 p.m. at the Creek Nation Council Oak Park. That's 1750 South Cheyenne. So if you want to enjoy a morning of Muscogee tradition, that is a wonderful place to be. And there will be activities at the Tulsa Creek Indian Community, 8611 South Union Avenue. That's the Jinx exit off of 75. So go enjoy the dinner, stickball, stomp dance to follow. So a wonderfully full day of celebration. The 13th Annual Pink Party for Breast Cancer Awareness is coming up on Wednesday, October 28th from 1 to 4 p.m. at the Muscogee Creek Nation Dome. And if you're interested, registration will begin at noon. And for more information, call 918-756-4300, 4333, extension 281. So give them a call if you'd like to take part in that. Vietnam Veterans Honor Power at the Dallas Veterans, gosh, these V's are getting me, Dallas Veterans Medical Center in Dallas, Texas. That's November 7th. So if you want to join in that powwow, 405-227-3514 for more information. Finally, Autism and Sensory Processing Training Part 2 with guest speaker Wendy Van covering sensory processing refresher from the first training activities and techniques. November 9th from 1 to 4. That's at the Muscogee Tribal Mound Building in Okmulgee. All right, 918-224-9307. Okay, this is Gary Fife saying thank you. Mado Mabo Hedjit Scott. Check with us next week for more Muscogee Radio. You've been listening to Muscogee Radio. Join us again next week for more local, tribal, and community news and updates. Mado.